Welcome to part 5 of Unit 7, Motivation, Emotion, and Personality. Today we're going to start talking about emotion, and we're going to start by just first looking at the theories about emotion and the physiology of emotion. So the first thing is to basically define what emotion is. What is emotion? So what it is, it's a mind and body's integrated response to a stimulus of some kind. So again, there's a few specific pieces that have to be there. There are, again, 3 parts to it. There is a physiological arousal, there are expressive behaviors, and there are conscious experiences. So again, there's some really important parts that define emotion. Okay, so again, there has to be a stimulus that causes it. So a stimulus is going to be the starting point. From there, we need to see some sort of physiological arousal. We need to then see some sort of expressive behavior and then a conscious experience. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 pieces. Okay, again, stimulus, arousal, behavior, and experience. Okay, those are the 4 pieces that we're going to be looking for. Now, there are 2 big main questions that are debated in psychology when we talk about emotion. The first one is basically kind of the chicken or the egg debate. So does bodily arousal come before, after, or at the same time as the emotional feelings? So basically, do the physiological things that happen in our body, our heartbeat speeding up, our muscles tensing, sweating, whatever, do those things happen before, after, or at the same time as the emotional feeling that we get from the emotion? Okay, so fear is an example that we'll often use. So when you are afraid, do you feel afraid, like the emotion of fear, at the same time that our body reacts? Does our body react before? Does our body react after? That's the first debate. What's coming first? The second one is the cognition and emotion kind of connection. So how do thinking and feeling interact is the next big question. Does cognition always come before emotion? So there's also a thinking aspect, right? When we're talking about cognition, we're talking about the processes going on in our mind. So do we have to, for example, label a stimulus before we can feel the emotion, or do we feel the emotion and then label the stimulus after? What order is that process happening? How do they interact? And what's coming before or after? So those are, again, our 2 big questions we're going to be looking at. As we get further on and we start looking at the different emotions or the different theories, you'll notice how they basically kind of try to answer these different questions. So, physiology of emotions. We can't easily see differences in emotions by tracking the heart rate, breathing, or perspiration. So these are all examples of things that are present in all emotions. So what that means is when you're happy, your heart rate will increase, your breathing will increase, your perspiration will increase. Same thing when you're afraid, same thing when you're sad, same thing when you're angry, right? Those are all relatively the same reactions we're going to get. And I'm not going to say there aren't little differences, but overall those things are going to react the same. So when we talk about arousal, that's what we're talking about. Heart rate, breathing, perspiration, all those things are kind of universal for emotions. But we can use facial expressions and brain activity to look at different emotions. Those will vary. So you can actually see at the bottom there are those brain scans there, and you can see the different parts of the brain that are lighting up when we feel different emotions. This first piece is actually a good example of why polygraph tests aren't actually very reliable. Polygraph tests are basically taking in your heart rate, your breathing, your perspiration. It's technically called like your skin electricity or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is, but they're measuring that. And the problem is that no matter what emotion we're feeling, that's what the reaction is going to be. So the idea is that if you're lying, right? The idea behind a polygraph is that if you're lying, your heart rate will increase, your breathing will increase, you'll sweat, you'll perspirate, because you're nervous. The problem is that 1, some people don't get nervous when they lie. 2, I might be nervous regardless of what I'm talking about, right? Regardless if I'm lying or not, I might just be nervous to be there. So this is one of the reasons why polygraph tests really aren't a reliable way of telling if someone's lying or not. because they aren't actually looking at what we need to look at to tell what emotions people are feeling or what they're actually doing. So this is going to get us into our theories, right? And these are the most important parts of this section, is understanding these different theories. And it does get a little confusing. Basically, they're using the same 4 parts. Some of them use a little bit less or a little bit more, but about those same 4 parts that we talked about at the very beginning, and then they're ordering them differently. So they're moving them around, and they're adjusting the order that they're happening in or what processes they're going through. So our first one is the James Lange theory. The James Lange theory says that our experience of emotion is our awareness of our physiological responses to our emotion arousing stimulus. So you can see that in this diagram. So we have a stimulus, which in this example is the bull, right? That's the stimulus. So we see the bull charging. When we see the bull charging, our body has a physiological reaction. You can see those in the middle, right? We have increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, elevated perspiration levels. We sweat. So those are our physiological reaction, our physiological response. Then what happens is the emotion is actually us becoming aware of this response. So we become aware that our heart is beating faster, we become aware that our blood pressure is rising, we become aware that we're sweating, and then we feel the emotion, in this case, fear. They use fear for most of these as an example because it's the easiest to think about, like stimulus, because fear is one where you see a stimulus and you feel the emotion right away, right? So they're going to use fear for pretty much all of these. But again, stimulus, physiological reaction, and then emotion. Okay. Our next example is the Canon Barr theory of emotion. Let me see, I gotta move myself a little bit to get out of the way. That'll work, I guess. Whatever. All right. So our first one, James Lange. Second one, Canon Barr. Now the Canon Barr looks a little bit different. So I'm going to read the definition and I'll kind of explain the chart there. So it says the theory that an emotion arousing stimulus simultaneously triggers the physiological responses and the subjective experience of emotion. So it's not causing either, it's happening at the same time. So again, here's our chart. So we have stimulus, so you can imagine the bull. Now here we have perception and interpretation. So we perceive that the bull is there and we understand what's happening, right? We see that it's a danger to us. Then at the exact same time, we experience the autonomic arousal, which is the physiological response. Heartbeat quickens, we sweat, when our blood pressure increases. And at the exact same time, we feel the emotion of fear. Okay, so both of these are happening at the same time. If you remember, James Lange was stimulus, arousal, emotion. This one is stimulus and then arousal and emotion at the same time. So they're not causing one another. An example of this that fits with this would be where researchers, victims in high spinal cord injuries, point to some link due to an increase or decrease of intensity with certain emotions. So a high spinal cord injury would be a spinal cord injury that's higher up in our spine, pretty straightforward. And basically what's happening is they basically will have increased or decreased intensity with certain emotions. Now, what this means is obviously if I have a high spinal cord injury, I'm not aware of the physiological response that are happening in my body because I can't feel it, right? There's no nerves that are connecting. So what this kind of tells us is that the autonomic arousal, the physiological response, can't be causing an emotion because they actually feel these emotions still, right? They're still feeling these emotions and they're still feeling them in a strong way. And some of them are actually more intense or affected by this injury. Let's continue on. Let's go down here. Okay. Now we're getting into kind of some of the more modern theories. So those other ones were a little bit older. They're not necessarily as used today, but some of these, the next few we talk about are going to be kind of the newer theories that are a little bit more broadly used today. So the first one we have is the Shakhtar-Singer two-factor theory. Okay, Shakhtar-Singer two-factor theory. So again, I'm just going to read it and then we'll kind of talk about it. So it suggests that the physiological arousal occurs first, and then the individual must identify the reason for this arousal to experience and label it as an emotion. So this is basically, it's very similar to James Lange, except for they're adding a step. So we have a stimulus happens, right? Our body has a physiological response, physiological arousal. Again, in our examples, increased heart rate, increased perspiration, increased blood pressure. Then what has to happen, what they've added, is that we must identify the reason for the arousal. Okay? So our body becomes aroused, we must identify it cognitively, and once we identify it, now we are able to experience and label it as whatever emotion it is. So you can see that in this example. So we see a bear, and one thing to keep in mind is this is happening incredibly quickly, right? Our neurons are firing super, super fast. So it's not like you see something and then the physiological thing happens, and then like 3 minutes later you realize what it is, and then you feel afraid. It's all happening incredibly quickly. So the idea is we have a physical stimulus. So in this example, it's the bear. Then we feel the physiological response, right? So we become aroused, our heart beats, right? You can kind of see the shock. Then we label the stimulus, okay? Label the physical response and associate it with an emotion. So we know what's happening. We label the fact that our heartbeat is quickening. We associate that heartbeat quickening with fear, and we then feel that emotion. Okay, so it's stimulus, physiological arousal, labeling, emotion. Okay, stimulus, physiological arousal, labeling, emotion. That's what's happening in the Shakhtar-Singer two-factor theory. Oops, I went past one. Did I not go past one? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I was getting a little ahead of myself. So one way that we can actually see this exemplified, this two-factor theory exemplified, is what is called the spillover effect. So again, this is something that would kind of be supporting the Shakhtar two-factor theory, the Shakhtar-Singer two-factor theory. So what the spillover effect is an example where arousal from one event can spill over and become a different emotion depending on how we interpret or label it. So and the gifts in here are actually a real life example. So I'm gonna mess up the year because I can't remember. I think it was Clinton. I think it was when Bill Clinton was being nominated as the Democratic nominee for president one of the years, if I remember correctly. But anyway, the band Rage Against the Machine, which you see on the left, had a concert outside of the convention. Okay. Now, if you know who Rage Against the Machine is, and you can probably kind of guess by the name, they are you'd probably call them like a hard rock band. But at a concert, right, you're going to experience a really high level of arousal. Now, at a concert you go to, even if you go to like rock concerts, it's an enjoyable experience generally, right? Like even if you go to metal bands, it's not like the people going there are angry during the concert as long as the concert goes off, right? So they're becoming, it's an arousing experience though, right? You're excited, you're partying, right? All that kind of stuff is happening. Now, what we saw actually was after the concert, a large chunk of, and there's obviously like a whole lot of conversations about where they actually people at the concert, blah, 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 whatever, but they kind of spilled out into the city, and they ended up having basically a riot or a small riot. And that's kind of what you're seeing on the right is police basically tear gassing and getting these people out. So what we're seeing here is, again, where we have an arousing experience. So the people are becoming excited during the concert. Concert ends, and you still have all that emotion, right? You're still, or I shouldn't say all that emotion, you're still very aroused, right? There's still a lot going on. You're still experiencing all those physiological things. And I'm sure all of you experienced this. If you've ever done something that was really exciting, or you've gone to a concert, right afterwards, you still feel, right, all that kind of arousal. You feel all that physiological stuff going on. And what happened is it turned from a concert that was a normal concert into anger, right? And that then basically that emotion spilled over into a different one. It went from a concert experience, which is generally a positive one, into a angry experience, which then caused the riot. Now, again, how does this kind of connect to that? The idea is the emotion is dependent on the labeling. So when I'm at the concert, I'm labeling this arousal as me being happy, being excited, having fun. When it ends, right, and I'm still feeling this emotion, it's possible for it to get labeled a different way. And it's possible for that emotion to then spill over and now become labeled as anger, and then it becomes anger, right? So that's what this kind of idea is of the spillover effect. That's going to get us to our next section, or our next theories. So we've got two separate ones here. So we have, I think I messed up his name. I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but I believe it's Zajonc and Ledoux. So they argue that in some responses happen instantly without conscious appraisal. So they're going to argue there's basically kind of two pathways that our emotions can go through. There are they call it the high road and the low road, the thinking high road and the speedy low road. You can see that in his images here on the bottom. Thinking high road, speedy low road. So sometimes we have a stimulus come in, it goes to the thalamus, it goes to the somatosensory cortex, it goes to the prefrontal cortex, it goes to the amygdala, right? During these first parts, right, obviously thalamus is taking information, sending it, or somatosensory cortex is interpreting that understanding what we're seeing in that information. Our prefrontal cortex is probably the cortex going to be labeling, right? That's our higher level thinking. So it's labeling what's happening. Then it goes to the amygdala, which is the emotion center, right? And then we feel fear. So this is basically the same. This is Shakhtar's two-factor theory right here, just in more of a biological image. Now, what they argued, though, was that there wasn't just this one way, that sometimes we actually experience an instantaneous emotional response, that a stimulus comes in, it immediately goes to our amygdala, and we immediately feel the fear response. Okay, that's the difference. So all they're adding, Zajonc and Ledoux are adding, is this second piece, this speedy low road, that sometimes it does get cognitively labeled, but sometimes it's actually just going to skip that and go right to the emotion, the speedy low road. We also have Lazarus. So Lazarus' theory said that cognitive appraisal defines our emotion, although sometimes it's actually unconscious. So really, these are just kind of adding layers onto the two-factor theory, where Lazarus is going to say sometimes these are actually unconscious responses, that there are times when we feel an emotion without actually consciously understanding what it is or why we're feeling it. So they're just kind of adding some pieces on. And again, this kind of could also go to explaining kind of this speedy low road in just a little bit different terms. So the last piece we're going to talk about very quickly is just the 5 basic emotions. So most emotional scientists agree that there are 5 basic emotions. Now, again, there's a lot of different psychologists that have a lot of different numbers. At the end of the day, there's obviously like thousands and thousands that you could technically say are emotions. But most of them say that there are 5 basic ones, and then everything after that is just combinations of these. Again, sometimes it does vary. Some people argue that there's more like 8 or 16, but 5 is kind of the main consensus. Those 5 emotions are anger, fear, joy, disgust, and sadness. Now, the reason that we generally will stick with these 5 is because these are emotions that we can see at birth. So we can see anger, fear, joy, disgust, and sadness in infants from birth. And then as you get older, obviously your emotions can get more and more complex. That's where we're going to wrap this up today. So please take some time, do a quick summary on the theories of emotion, and I'll see you guys next time.